My name is Rashmi Halker Singh, and I'm the Deputy Editor of Headache. It is my pleasure to be joined today by my friend and colleague, Dr. Betsy Seng, who is the first author of this year's Members' Choice Award. The manuscript is entitled The Unique Role of Stigma in Migraine-Related Disability and Quality of Life. Welcome, Dr. Seng, and congratulations so much on this paper.
Thank you. We're thrilled to have received the award, and we're excited that this work is getting attention.
So, first of all, I was wondering if you could speak to a little bit about stigma and what that means to people who live with migraines, since that was such a central part of your work.
So this work is trying to put migraine in its social context. And stigma is one way that we as individuals interact with the society around us. So it's impossible to understand what stigma means without understanding stereotypes. So stereotypes are these beliefs that we hold as a society about certain people groups. Stereotypes can be negative, they can be positive, but in general, holding stereotypes is kind of a bad thing for that people group, because you're looking at that group as a group rather than as individuals who make up the group. So there are stereotypes about people with migraine, stereotypes that people with migraine, that migraine is just a headache, that it's not a neurologic disease that is more severe and has more of an impact on people's lives than the kind of routine headaches that other people may experience. There are also stigma about using migraine to try to get out of doing things around the house or at work. And stereotypes that people with migraine aren't good colleagues to necessarily have, because they may not be able to complete tasks in the way that you expected because of that unexpected nature of migraine. So these are stereotypes that are held in our society about migraine. And stigma is when either people with migraine start to believe those stereotypes about themselves. That's internalized stigma. So a person with migraine might say, oh my goodness, I am so flaky. I'm such a bad mom. I can never make it to my son's soccer game. When what's happening is that person's having migraine attacks, and it wouldn't be good for anybody for them to go to the soccer game, but she's kind of internalizing that. Enacted stigma is a second kind of stigma where people experience discrimination because of those stereotypes in their environment. So someone who may be passed over for a promotion at work because they have migraine, that would be a kind of, and if they fear that, or they are kind of experiencing some hostility at work in and around having migraine, that's enacted stigma.
There are many types of stigma, and I was reading in your paper that about a third of individuals who live with migraine can experience stigma. There was a population-based study, so it's a very prevalent situation in this very prevalent disease. I thought that was heartbreaking and interesting all at once. So, is that what motivated you to look into this in more detail with your project?
Yeah, I have been very interested in understanding how people with migraine kind of live in their social groups. Because when we think about migraine, those of us who are in the field a lot, we think a lot about migraine disability. And the most important migraine disability that we talk about is restriction or prevention of role functioning. So that means that when people are in their, family circle, or when people are at work, they can't accomplish the roles that are kind of set out for them within their societal and social structure. And that interaction with society is such a critical piece of why migraine is so disabling. And I think that we need to understand more about how people with migraine interact with society and how society interacts with migraine. Because there's only so much that we can do about society at the individual level. Many times when I'm working with patients in my clinic, there's only so much I can do about the fact that their boss doesn't believe they have migraine, or doesn't believe that migraine is a big deal. There's only so much I can do about that by talking to the person in front of me, right? It's
Absolutely. Yeah.
more of a societal problem, and we need to have societal kind of solutions to these problems and public health solutions to these problems. So my goal with studying stigma was to understand how these interactions between the individual and society.
So tell me about your project. What was the study all about?
So we surveyed a number of people in neurology clinics all over New York City. When we whittled it down to people who we felt extremely confident both have a diagnosis of migraine and screen positive for migraine, we were left with 121 people with migraine who we pulled out of general neurology and tertiary care headache centers in the New York City area. And we gave them a lot of surveys. And one of the surveys that we gave them was the stigma scale called the SSCI-8. This stigma scale was originally developed to assess stigma in epilepsy. And one of the nice things about providing people with migraine stigma scales that are more broad is that it lets us understand how much stigma different people groups have. It lets us compare stigma across different neurologic conditions and different medical conditions. What that does mean is that we don't have really specific stigma items for migraine. And I think that there's a benefit to looking at stigma both ways. So this stigma scale was a little bit broader. And I think that that's important, like as more and more stigma studies come out, to think, ooh, is this broad stigma or is this really, really specific? This study was more broad. Some of the things that we found were that, stigma was associated with so people with higher stigma also have higher headache days, and people with higher stigma also had higher levels of disability, both including role restriction, role function, and emotion function. Kind of all of it was pretty highly associated with disability. The stigma was also associated with some other things that we would expect, psychological factors like anxiety and depression.
Were you surprised by any of this?
So I think that the biggest thing that I was surprised about is that we conducted some certain types of analyses called mediation analyses. And the goal of this analysis is to try to parse variance in how things are associated, to understand, to start to understand causal pathways. Now, this is a cross-sectional study, so we aren't looking at necessarily how things develop over time. We're just trying to understand this kind of covariance between two variables. And the interesting thing to me was that anxiety was not a mediator of the relationship between stigma and any of the disability outcomes. So we asked the question, how much of the relationship between stigma and the disability outcomes could be accounted for by anxiety? And the answer was almost none. So it looks like a thought pattern that many people with pain and many people with migraine have, where when you start to experience pain, you fear the pain and you fear that it could be the worst outcome. That cognitive style was a mediator of the relationship between stigma and disability outcomes, as was depressive symptoms, but anxiety not so much. And that just really surprised me, because we see anxiety as so central to so many other maladaptive processes in migraine. Anxiety just seems to travel together with migraine in really important ways, and this isn't a way it seems to. So I thought that was kind of remarkable. The way I kind of translate that in my head is that when you have people in your life who don't believe you and who don't believe your experiences, that may also co-occur with anxiety, but the anxiety isn't a potential mediator of the relationship. It's not anxiety that would be driving any disability changes in that context. It's depressive symptoms and fear.
Okay.
So those are the things that we need to think about in people who have high levels of stigma and who experience high levels of stigma as they walk through their daily lives.
So as you know, I'm a clinician. I take care of many people who live with migraine. In fact, that's what I've been doing all day today. What are things that I, as a clinician, can take from your paper as I counsel my patients who live with this?
So it's interesting, before we started this podcast, one of the things that we talked about briefly was the idea of screeners in clinics. And I actually would want to make sure that the clinicians in my audience know that I do not think you should be adding stigma as a screener in a clinic. This is not a problem that I think is best going to be solved on the individual level. As we understand more about stigma, what we're understanding is about the hostility of our culture towards people with migraine and how that's experienced in their lives, and how that hostile culture causes, all sorts of negative consequences to our patients. So I think that my hope is that studies like this and these data can help empower the clinical community to say our patients need accommodations at work. Our patients need to be taken seriously. Bring in family members and be like, I am a neurologist. This is a serious disease. Like, we're not messing around here. I think that we need to be aware that our patients live in society and they live in a culture. And when they leave our doors, that they are going back out into that culture, and they need to be as prepared as they can be. And we need to be their advocates. The second piece is that I think that the medical community often contributes to stigma in ways that we don't intend and don't anticipate. So I think that it's important for us to really be thoughtful about how we talk about migraine with our patients, to make sure that we are not blaming patients for migraine, the disease, or migraine attacks as they occur. I think we need to be really aware that there's some recent evidence, right? For example, that a third of migraine attacks have absolutely no relationship with stress.
Yeah.
So this assumption that every person who comes through our door has to have a certain type of lifestyle change is potentially stigmatizing for people who are like, I tried, it hasn't helped. This is not the thing. So I think that we just need to be careful as a medical community to make sure that we are communicating with our patients in ways that don't contribute to this stigma, and in ways that give them ammunition as they go back out in the world to say, this is a episodic neurologic disease, and I have this disease, and that means that I need for people to both take it seriously and to give me a break sometimes in my life as I'm trying to manage this condition.
Those are excellent recommendations and things I will be taking back to my clinic as soon as tomorrow. So that's great. Thank you so much for that. Do you have any additional thoughts you want to share?
I want to put a call out there for people who study stigma and other diseases. Migraine is a really cool disease. Please come play with us and help us better understand and help us improve the lives of our patients with migraine. I think that this study, as well as a number of other studies in recent years, are showing that stigma is a really big deal. And it would be great to have more people really thinking about it.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. And thank you so much for the incredible work you're doing. You're helping us to better understand migraine as a disease and how we can take care of people who live with it. So I really, really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.